You know that friend who's always just there? The one who drops everything when you call, remembers your coffee order, and somehow makes every bad day better? Well, I had that friend, and I thought I was smart enough to keep him exactly where I wanted him. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy my stories, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I'm Mira, I'm 28, and 3 years ago, I met Bruce through mutual friends at this dive bar downtown. He wasn't my usual type, not the kind of guy who'd make other women jealous or boost my ego when we walked into a room together. Bruce was more understated, thoughtful in a way that felt almost old-fashioned, like he actually listened when people talked, instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. He had this quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself, and while that wasn't exactly thrilling, it was comfortable. We clicked immediately over our shared hatred of pretentious coffee shops and our ability to roast pretty much anyone within a 5-meter radius. Bruce had this dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. He'd make these perfectly timed observations that had me cracking up when I least expected it. Before I knew it, we were texting constantly, having those marathon phone conversations that somehow lasted until 3 a.m., and hanging out multiple times a week. The thing is, I always knew Bruce had feelings for me. It wasn't subtle. The way he'd light up when I walked into a room, how he'd remember every tiny detail I mentioned, the way he'd drop his own plans if I needed something. And look, I'm not going to lie and say I didn't enjoy it. Having someone who thought I was amazing, who made me feel like the most important person in his world, that felt incredible. But here's what I told myself. I was being kind by not leading him on. I never explicitly said I had romantic feelings for him, never made promises I couldn't keep. We were just really close friends. And if he chose to interpret that as something more, well, that wasn't really my responsibility, was it? Except maybe I wasn't being as innocent as I thought. Maybe I did let those hugs linger a little longer than necessary. Maybe I did call him when I was feeling lonely, knowing he'd drop everything to come over. Maybe I did lean into him during movies, rest my head on his shoulder, send him good morning texts that felt more intimate than friendly. But that's just how I am with people I care about, right? I'm naturally affectionate. The truth is, Bruce made my life easier in about 100 different ways. He was my emotional support system, my entertainment when I was bored, my ego boost when I needed validation. When dates went wrong, which happened more often than I'd like to admit, Bruce was always there to listen, to make me laugh, to remind me that I deserved better. He never made me feel judged or criticized. He just accepted me exactly as I was. And maybe that acceptance made me a little careless. Maybe I started taking for granted that Bruce would always be there, always be available, always put me first. Maybe I got comfortable knowing that no matter how I treated him, no matter how many times I canceled plans for other guys or ignored his calls when I was busy, he'd still be waiting when I needed him. Looking back, I can see how selfish that was. But at the time, it just felt natural. Bruce was my constant, my safe harbor, and I genuinely believed that's what he wanted to be. I thought I was giving him what he needed, my friendship, my presence in his life, my trust and affection. I didn't realize that what I was actually doing was keeping him in this weird limbo where he couldn't move on, but couldn't have what he really wanted either. The signs were all there, though. The way he'd get quiet when I talked about other guys, how he'd find excuses to touch me, adjusting my necklace, brushing lint off my shirt, playing with my hair when we were watching TV. The way he'd look at me sometimes, like he was trying to memorize my face. I saw it all, and I chose to ignore it because acknowledging it would have meant making a choice I wasn't ready to make. Because here's the thing, I didn't want to lose Bruce, but I also didn't want to be with him. He was too available, too eager to please, too willing to put me on this pedestal I didn't deserve. Bruce wasn't weak exactly, but there was something about how easily he'd bent to my will that made me lose respect for him. Even though I'd never admit that out loud, I wanted passion, excitement, the kind of relationship that felt like an adventure. Bruce felt like settling, And at 28, I wasn't ready to give up on finding something that made my heart race. So I kept things exactly as they were, walking this careful line between friendship and something more, taking everything Bruce offered while giving just enough back to keep him hoping. I told myself I was protecting both of us, him from rejection, me from losing someone who'd become essential to my happiness. That night, everything changed. Started like any other. I'd had a brutal week at work. My boss was being a complete nightmare, and my ex had posted some smug photo online that made me want to throw my phone across the room. Bruce invited me over to watch some indie film neither of us really cared about, and I figured, why not? I needed the distraction, and he always made me feel better about everything. We were halfway through the movie when I started feeling overwhelmed by everything that had gone wrong lately. Without really thinking about it, I shifted closer to Bruce on the couch and rested my head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around me immediately, like it was the most natural thing in the world, and for a moment, everything felt quiet and safe. I tilted my head up to look at him, maybe to say something about how grateful I was for his friendship. And that's when I noticed the way he was looking at me. His eyes had this intensity I'd seen before, but always pretended not to notice. And then, slowly, carefully, he started leaning in. My heart started pounding, but not in a good way. This was the moment I'd been avoiding for 3 years, the conversation I never wanted to have. I froze, watching him get closer, knowing I should say something, but not wanting to hurt him. When his lips were just inches from mine, I finally found my voice. "Let's not ruin the friendship." "Okay," I said softly, pulling back just enough to break the spell. Bruce stopped immediately, his expression shifting from hopeful to something I couldn't quite read. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, not his usual genuine smile, but something smaller, more careful. "You're right," he said, sitting back. "I don't want things to get weird between us." I felt this weird mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because I'd avoided having to explicitly reject him. Disappointment because, well, because some small part of me had been curious about what it would feel like to kiss him. But that was just the moment talking. I didn't actually want to risk our friendship for something that probably wouldn't work out anyway. "You're my favorite person," I told him, which was true. I just don't want to mess that up. Bruce nodded, but something in his eyes had changed. "I get it. We're better as friends." The words felt final in a way that made my stomach twist slightly, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was what I wanted, right? To keep things exactly as they were. "You're not upset?" I asked, suddenly needing his reassurance. "No," he said, standing up to grab his jacket. "You were being direct. That's enough." He was leaving. Bruce never left early, especially not when I was having a rough week. "You don't have to go," I said quickly. "We can just pretend this never happened." "I'm not making it weird," he replied. But his tone was different somehow. Cooler. "I'm just tired. Good night, Majera." After you left, I sat there staring at the TV, feeling oddly unsettled. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "Hey, don't make this awkward. I really do care about you." I started to reply, then stopped. Something about the whole interaction felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Bruce had taken the rejection well, maybe better than I'd expected. So why did I feel like something fundamental had just shifted between us? Over the next few days, things seemed normal on the surface. We still texted, still made plans to hang out, but there was something different in Bruce's responses. They were shorter, less enthusiastic. When I sent him a meme that would usually make him laugh, he just replied with a thumbs up emoji. When I called him late at night because I couldn't sleep, he answered, but the conversation felt stilted, like he was distracted. "You okay?" I asked him one evening. "You've been kind of distant lately." "Yeah, just busy with work stuff," he said. But it didn't ring true. Bruce had never been too busy for me before. We're good though, right? After the other night? Of course we're good, Mira, nothing's changed. But something had changed, even if I couldn't define what it was. Bruce was still my friend, still responded when I reached out, but the eagerness was gone. The way he used to drop everything when I called, the way he'd text me first thing in the morning, all of that had stopped. At first, I told myself it was temporary. He probably just needed some time to process what had happened, and then things would go back to normal. But as the weeks passed, the distance between us seemed to grow rather than shrink. When I suggested we grab brunch at our usual spot, he showed up 15 minutes late, wearing clothes I'd never seen before, more put together than his usual style. He didn't hug me when he arrived, just sat down and started looking at the menu like he was in a hurry. "You seem different," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Different? How?" "I don't know. More serious, I guess." Bruce shrugged. "Maybe I am." The conversation felt forced, like we were strangers making small talk. When I reached across the table to touch his hand, something I'd done 1,000 times before, he didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. It was like touching a statue. "Are you sure you're not upset about what happened?" I pressed. "I'm not upset, Mira. I'm just consistent." I didn't know what that meant, but something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. After brunch, he hugged me goodbye, but it felt perfunctory, like he was going through the motions. That's when I started to panic. Not because I suddenly wanted to date Bruce, but because I was losing him in a way I'd never anticipated. I thought rejecting his romantic advances would reset us back to friendship. Instead, it felt like he was slowly disappearing from my life entirely. I tried calling him more often, but he'd let it go to voicemail and text me back hours later with some excuse about being busy. I'd invite him to hang out, and he'd have other plans. When I asked what he was doing instead, he'd give vague answers about meeting up with people from work or trying new things. The worst part was how polite he was being about it all. He wasn't ignoring me or being rude, he was just unavailable. And somehow, that felt worse than if he'd gotten angry or tried to argue with me about my decision. One Friday night, I showed up at his apartment with takeout from his favorite restaurant, figuring we can have one of our old movie nights. But when he answered the door, he was already dressed to go out. "Oh," I said, holding up the food. "I thought we could hang out." "I've got plans tonight," he said, not unkindly, but not with his usual warmth either. "With who?" "Just some people." Bruce looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face. Maybe pity, maybe frustration. "No, Mira, just people." As he walked past me to leave, I blurted out, "You don't talk to me like you used to." He stopped and turned back. "He told me we were better as friends, so I'm being a friend." "This isn't what I meant," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. "But it's what you asked for." And then he left, leaving me standing in his hallway with a bag of cooling food and the sudden, terrifying realization that I might have miscalculated everything. That night, I sent him a long text, not quite an apology, but an attempt to explain how much our friendship meant to me, how I hated that things felt weird between us. I told him I missed talking to him, missed feeling like I had my best friend back. He never responded. The silence wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was indifferent. And for the first time in 3 years, I started to understand that Bruce might actually be serious about moving on. Over the next month, I watched from the sidelines as Bruce seemed to build an entirely new life that didn't include me. He started going to the gym regularly, joined some kind of social group, and began posting photos on social media of himself at places I'd never been, with people I'd never met. The Bruce in these photos looked different somehow, more confident, more relaxed, like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally learned how to exhale. And the more I saw of this new version of Bruce, the more I realized what I'd lost. Not just his romantic interest, but his friendship, his attention, his unwavering belief that I was worth prioritizing above everything else in his life.
I thought I was being smart by keeping him at arm's length, maintaining the perfect balance between too much and too little. Instead, I'd pushed him so far away that he'd found a completely different life, one where I wasn't the center of his universe anymore. The worst part was that I was starting to realize I didn't just miss having Bruce as my emotional support system. I missed him.
The way he laughed at my jokes, the way he remembered things that mattered to me, the way he made me feel like I was the most interesting person in any room. But it was too late for that realization because Bruce had already figured out how to be happy without me. And watching him thrive while I felt like I was falling apart was the most painful lesson I'd ever learned about taking someone's love for granted. I started seeing Bruce around town more often, usually with his new group of friends, at coffee shops I'd never known he frequented, at restaurants we'd never tried together. And every time I saw him, he looked more like the person he was becoming and less like the person who used to rearrange his entire schedule around my whims. The first time I saw him with Leah, I almost didn't recognize the situation for what it was. They were at a bookstore downtown, and she was showing him something on her phone while he laughed. Really laughed, the way he used to laugh with me. She was pretty in an understated way, with dark hair and the kind of easy confidence that didn't need to announce itself. I watched them from across the store, feeling something ugly twist in my stomach. Bruce looked relaxed with her in a way that felt familiar but wrong, like seeing someone else wearing your clothes. When they left together, I followed them at a distance, telling myself I was just curious about who this woman was. They went to a small restaurant I'd always wanted to try, but Bruce had never suggested. Through the window, I could see them talking animatedly, leaning across the table toward each other. That night, I broke my own rule about not texting Bruce and sent him a casual message. "Saw you downtown today. Who was your friend?" His response was infuriatingly simple. "Just someone from work. She seemed nice." She is. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with finding out more about Leah. I started checking Bruce's social media constantly, looking for clues about their relationship. When that didn't yield enough information, I began showing up at places I thought I might run into them, always with some excuse about why I happened to be there. The second time I accidentally bumped into them, Bruce's expression when he saw me was unreadable. Leah was friendly enough, but there was something in her eyes that suggested Bruce had told her about me, though I couldn't guess what he might have said. "Mira, this is Leah," Bruce said simply. "Leah, this is Mira. We used to be close." Used to be, past tense, like our entire friendship was something that had happened to him once a long time ago. "Nice to meet you," Leah said with a smile that seemed genuine. "Bruce has mentioned you." I wanted to ask what exactly he'd said, but something in Bruce's posture warned me off. Instead, I made small talk for a few minutes before excusing myself, feeling like an intruder in a conversation that had been perfectly comfortable before I arrived. That night, I called Bruce for the first time in weeks. He answered on the fourth ring. "What's up, Mira?" "I just wanted to see how you're doing," I said, trying to sound casual. "We haven't really talked in a while." "I'm good. Busy, but good." "Leah seems sweet." There was a pause. "She is." "So you two are?" "We're seeing each other, yeah." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. That's great. I'm happy for you." "Thanks." Another silence stretched between us. Finally, I said, "I miss talking to you. I miss us." "Mira," Bruce said gently, "we talked about this. We're friends. That's what you wanted." "I know, but I didn't think it would mean we'd barely speak anymore." "Things change when people move on. Have you moved on?" "I mean, yeah," he said without hesitation. "I have." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling hollowed out. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Bruce was supposed to stay in his designated role in my life. Always available, always caring, always there when I needed him. He wasn't supposed to find someone else and build a whole new life that didn't revolve around me. But that's exactly what he'd done.
And watching him be happy with someone else was forcing me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself, about how I treated him, about what I'd really lost when I rejected him that night, about the kind of person I'd become without even realizing it. The problem was, even as I started to see my own behavior more clearly, I couldn't seem to stop myself from making it worse. Instead of accepting that Bruce had moved on and trying to be genuinely happy for him, I found myself looking for ways to insert myself back into his life. I started texting him more frequently, sending him memes and inside jokes from our friendship, trying to remind him of what we used to have. When he responded politely but briefly, I'd call instead, hoping to recreate some of those long conversations we used to have. But Bruce had become a master of the polite brush-off. He'd answer my calls, but keep them short. He'd respond to my texts, but never initiate conversations anymore. And every interaction left me feeling more desperate and pathetic than the last. The breaking point came at Tucker's birthday party 3 months after that night on Bruce's couch. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, partly because I knew Bruce would be there, and partly because I hoped being around our mutual friends would reset the dynamic between us somehow. But when I arrived, Bruce was already there with Leah. They weren't being overly affectionate or anything, but there was an easy intimacy between them that made my chest ache.
The way she'd touch his arm when she laughed, the way he'd lean in to hear her better over the music, the way they seemed to exist in their own little bubble, even in a crowded room. I spent most of the party watching them, nursing my drink, and feeling increasingly better. This was supposed to be my territory. These were my friends. This was my social circle. Bruce was supposed to be my +1 at events like this, not hers. When Leah went to the bathroom, I saw my chance and approached Bruce at the bar. "Hey, stranger," I said, trying for the playful tone we used to share. "Hey, Mira, having a good time?" "Yeah, it's fun. Weird seeing you with someone, though." Bruce looked at me carefully. "Weird how?" "I don't know. I guess I just got used to you being available." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong. Bruce's expression shifted, becoming cooler. Available for what? I didn't mean it like that. I backpedaled. I just meant we used to do everything together. It's an adjustment. "You made your choice about that, Mira. I respected it." "I know, but what? You thought I'd just wait around forever?" His tone was sharper than I'd ever heard it. And suddenly, I felt like everyone at the party was watching us, even though they probably weren't. "No, I miss my friend." "Your friend is right here," Bruce said. "But he's not the same person who used to drop everything for you anymore." That person was waiting for something that was never going to happen. Before I could respond, Leah returned, sliding up next to Bruce with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw my expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Bruce said, putting his arm around her. "Mira was just saying hi." I stood there for another awkward moment before excusing myself, feeling dismissed in a way that made my face burn with embarrassment. Later that night, after I'd had too much to drink and my inhibitions had completely disappeared, I sent Bruce a series of texts that I immediately regretted but couldn't take back. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I was scared of ruining what we had. You were always so patient with me. I didn't realize how rare that was. I see you with her, and I wonder if I made the biggest mistake of my life. Can we please just talk? Really talk like we used to?" Bruce read the messages. I could see the read receipts, but he didn't respond. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. A week later, I got a single text from him. "I think it's best if we take some space from each other. I wished you well, but I can't be what you need anymore, and you can't be what I need either." That was it. No explanation, no opportunity for discussion, no chance to argue my case. Just a polite final dismissal that felt like a door slamming shut. I spent the next several weeks oscillating between anger and desperation. How dare he cut me off so completely? After everything we'd shared, after 3 years of friendship, he was just going to throw it all away for some woman he'd known for a few months. But underneath the anger was something worse. The growing realization that Bruce was right. I hadn't been a good friend to him. I'd been selfish and manipulative, keeping him close enough to meet my needs, but far enough away to avoid any real commitment or risk. And now, watching him build a life that didn't include me at all, I was finally understanding what I'd actually lost. Not just his romantic interest, but his respect, his trust, his willingness to prioritize me above everything else in his world. The worst part was that I could see how much better he was without me. Through mutual friends, I heard about his new job, his new apartment, the trips he was taking with Leah. He seemed lighter somehow, more confident, like he'd been carrying a weight for years and had finally set it down. Meanwhile, I felt like I was falling apart. Without Bruce as my emotional safety net, I had to confront how few genuine connections I'd actually cultivated. I'd been so focused on keeping him in orbit around me that I'd never bothered to build a support system that didn't revolve around his unconditional availability. 8 months after that night, when I'd rejected his kiss, I ran into Bruce and Leah at a farmer's market downtown. They were looking at rings at a jewelry vendor's booth, and something about their body language suggested this wasn't casual browsing. I watched from behind a produce stand as the vendor showed them different options. As Leah held up her hand to see how various rings looked, as Bruce smiled at her with the kind of pure happiness I'd never seen on his face when he was with me. They looked like a couple who'd found their person, who'd figured out how to build something real together. And I looked like exactly what I was. Someone who'd had something precious and thrown it away because I was too selfish and scared to appreciate what it was worth. That night, I drafted a long email to Bruce. I apologized for everything, for leading him on, for taking him for granted, for the desperate texts after Tucker's party. I told him I understood why he'd cut contact, that I could see how toxic I'd been, even if I hadn't meant to be. But as I was about to hit send, I realized the email wasn't really for him. It was for me. Another attempt to insert myself into his life, to make him think about me and respond to me. Even my apology was selfish. So I deleted it and tried to move on with my life. Though moving on mostly meant learning to live with the constant ache of knowing I destroyed the best relationship I'd ever had because I was too immature to recognize what I had when I had it. A year later, I heard through Faith that Bruce and Leah had gotten engaged. The news hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. I spent that entire day in bed, cycling through every memory of my friendship with Bruce, wondering if there had been any moment where I could have made a different choice and ended up with a different outcome. But deep down, I knew the truth. Bruce hadn't left because I'd rejected him romantically. He'd left because I'd shown him over and over again that I didn't value him enough to be direct with him, didn't respect him enough to be clear about my intentions, didn't love him enough to either commit or let him go. And Leah hadn't stolen him from me. She'd simply been brave enough to love him the way he deserved to be loved, openly, generously, without games or manipulation or the constant fear of vulnerability. I'd had 3 years to figure that out. 3 years to choose honesty over comfort, 3 years to either love him back or care enough about him to set him free. Instead, I'd chosen the coward's path, keeping him close enough to serve my needs while maintaining enough distance to avoid any real risk to my heart. Now, Bruce was building a life with someone who'd never made him question his worth, never kept him guessing about where he stood, never treated his love like something to be managed rather than treasured. And I was left with the bitter knowledge that I'd had something rare and beautiful, and I'd destroyed it through my own selfishness and fear. The hardest part wasn't even losing Bruce. It was realizing what kind of person I'd become without noticing. Someone who took love for granted, who manipulated people's feelings to serve my own needs, who was so terrified of vulnerability that I'd rather hurt someone I cared about than risk being hurt myself. Looking back now, I can see that Bruce didn't just walk away from me that night when I rejected his kiss. He walked away from the version of himself that had been willing to accept scraps of affection from someone who would never love him the way he loved her. And in doing so, he'd found someone who could. I wish I could say I learned from the experience that losing Bruce taught me how to be a better person in future relationships, but the truth is, I'm still the same person who chose safety over love, who prioritized my own comfort over someone else's happiness, who was too proud to fight for something real when I had the chance. Bruce is married now. I saw the photos on social media. A small ceremony with close friends and family. Leah in a simple dress that made her glow with happiness. Bruce looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. I wasn't invited, of course. I haven't spoken to Bruce in over 2 years, and I probably never will again. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to kiss him back that night. Brave enough to risk our friendship for the possibility of something deeper. Then I remember that it was never really about that one moment. It was about 3 years of small choices, 3 years of putting my own needs first, 3 years of treating someone's love like it was guaranteed rather than gifted. And the truth is, even if I could go back and change that night, I'm not sure I would have made different choices. Because making different choices would have required me to be a different person. Someone braver, more generous, more willing to risk getting hurt in order to avoid hurting others. I wasn't that person then, and I'm not sure I'm that person now. Which means I probably deserved to lose Bruce, and he definitely deserved to find someone better than me. That's the real punishment for taking someone's love for granted. Not just losing them, but having to live with the knowledge that you were never worthy of what they offered you in the first place.
If this confession kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We share powerful true stories every day that explore the complex realities of life.